by a bent line, by a straight line, by a crooked line. The Crooked Path, a podcast for modern cunning folk with Peter Pagan.
Hello and welcome to The Crooked Path. My name is Peter Pagan and it's good to be back after a little trip to Canada. Tonight we're going to take a look at gods and goddesses, just a little subject. But first, I wanted to share a few items of news with you. Now then. For those of you who've been keeping track, we put out a little while ago a notice that we were accepting applications to study with us again. The class of 13, of 2013 that is, has completed their mammoth task, and we're about to gird our loins and start with the year class of 2014. And so we've had applications coming in, but there's still a few days left. I believe Sunday is the 1st of August, that means midnight on Saturday is the closing date. 1st of September, yes. I'm temporarily challenged in case you hadn't guessed. So if you want to put in an application to study with us, you have until midnight on Saturday. If you want to find out the information, you can go to my Facebook page. It's under my name, Peter Pagan. My author page has a note that will tell you. You'll also find on all of my Facebook pages, the one for Crooked Path, the one for K-Hex, the one for Pendragon Publishing. You'll also find links to the notice on all of those as well, and also on the Crooked Path page website, crookedpath.org. You may have to dig a little bit to find that one though. So just a quick précis of what's involved. The Eforth Wen tradition of Welsh witchcraft is opening its doors to a limited number of students, both locally and long distance, and long distance does include worldwide. We have the criteria of what information we require in your application and where to send it in the notice that I've just been talking about. Those of you who are in the Southern California area might be interested to know that we've been accepted to vend and for me to do a workshop at San Diego Pagan Pride in October. Looking forward to that, looking forward to meeting and greeting old friends and new, and having a blast down in San Diego. So if you're going to be in that area on the day that Pagan Pride is on, and of course I forgot to write down what that date is, being temporarily challenged, but it's sometime in early October. Go to their website, San Diego Pagan Pride, Google it, and we'll be there all day selling books, pottery, etched glass, and other tchotchkes of a pagan and mystical nature. While we were in Canada, we had some life-changing events go on. You may notice that I'm looking just a teensy bit more handsome than usual. Well, handsome is a relative term, of course. A little thinner, at least, because we've got onto a program to get ourselves nice and healthy and fit, so that I don't keel over and find myself back in hospital again. Because I've been told that if I die, my coven will kill me. So on that note, I am striving to become healthier. It's definitely a life-saving maneuver so that they don't kill me. And in the process, I'm also studying to get some accreditation to do some alternative therapies. My brother Colin, Dr. Colin Pagan, is a very highly regarded practitioner and teacher of alternative therapies in Canada. In fact, he's on the examining board for the Canadian Board of Alternative Therapists and a whole bunch of other organisations. And he's gone into partnership with the Open International University, which is based in India, to award international degrees in alternative therapies. And I'm going to be putting out a lot of information about this in the coming months. But basically what it means is if you've gone and got certified in a whole bunch of things such as aromatherapy, reflexology, massage, Reiki, spiritual healing, any alternative therapy that you can get a certification in to practice in your state, if you've got 5 modalities, you can apply to have that converted into a degree that is internationally recognized. And this is really cool, I think, anyway. And that's what I'm striving for. I'm going to learn 5 modalities and put in for my degree. And because I like helping people, strangely enough, and I thought it would be a good way to do it, and a good way to meet new people as well. As if I'm not meeting enough new people at the moment, going to strange foreign countries and what have you. But there you go. So that's the news for today. So as I said, the topic tonight is gods and goddesses. Let's start off, as usual, with the law, and we're going to look at the nature of deity. So the first question that springs to mind is, who or what are gods? Are you a god? Remember, if a demonic being asks you that, the answer is always yes. You can deal with the fallout from that one later. Pay the coin. But yes, I am a fan of the Ghostbusters movies. Mea culpa. So what are gods? You'll probably get a different answer from every person you ask, because even within the mainstream religions, people's concept of God is somewhat fuzzy. And this goes doubly for any of the pagan faiths, and witchcraft in particular, because, well, first of all, witchcraft is not a religion, it's a practice, and so there are witches out there who don't believe in the existence of gods at all, and there's every other variety as well. In an orthopraxy, it's what you do that matters, not what you believe. But even when what you believe is the important thing, such as in mainstream religions, there is a lot of debate on the nature of divinity, let alone the nature of deity. Monotheists have a habit of seeing their one God as omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, which has been summed up in the internet meme, ceiling cat is watching you masturbate. But when you have many gods, you have the luxury of having deities who are not omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Pagan gods do not watch you masturbate. This is a great sense of relief for many of us. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But there's still that whole nature of what the hell are they? Some people will tell you that gods are living, breathing entities that have their own objective existence within the universe. And other people will tell you that they're more of a representation of energies. Yet other people will tell you that they are archetypes, they represent concepts. And there's another set who will happily tell you that they are aspects of our own psyche and therefore are purely within the psychology of the human. And then there's people like me, who will tell you that they are all these things simultaneously. I actually had this discussion with my brother Colin while we were in Canada. His spirituality is, he likes to refer to himself as an Essene, a sort of mystical Christian. He's actually a practicing Mormon, but we won't hold that against him. And he also practices a lot of Native American spiritual practice. Interesting combination, but then he's an interesting fellow. He's my brother, what do you expect? And he asked me what my beliefs about God were. And when I talked about the all of the above option, he asked me whether I was hedging my bets. And I said no, because I'm going by my own experience, and my own experience is that at times gods behave as if they are living, breathing entities in their own rights. At times they behave like they're archetypes. At times they behave like there's something tucked away inside here, or inside here, or, well, you get the message. And my understanding, or my personal explanation for that, is that the concept of God or deity is too vast for mortal humans to get their head around. What we get is we get a glimpse. We see this big thing called deity, this concept, from a particular perspective, from a particular viewpoint, with our limited range of perception. And it's like that old thing about a group of blind men describing an elephant that they've encountered for the first time. The guy who gets the tail end is going to say it's long and thin and smells like shit. The guy at the other end is going to say it's long and thick and sprays water at you, and the guy in the middle is going to say it's huge and wrinkly. But they're all describing the same thing within the limits of their experience of it. And I think that's what we as as spiritual entities ourselves do, is that we tend to explain the gods in the terms of our limited perception of them. So for some of us it seems more psychological, for some of us it seems more literal, and for some of us it seems more archetypical. And eventually you have enough differing experiences that you eventually throw up your hands and say, you know, it's all of the above. I mean, you know, we're witches, we deal with paradox. One of the paradoxes is how it can be an archetype, a figment of your imagination, part of your psyche, and a living, breathing entity all at the same time. Well, the paradox there is it just works. And one day we'll understand it, at which point we will no longer be of this realm, and so we won't be able to pass on the information. So for now we'll make do with looking enigmatic. I don't know whether that actually looked enigmatic. I haven't practiced in front of a mirror, but that's my idea of what I think enigmatic looks like. Any complaints? Please send it to colinpadden@canada.inc. Anyway, so the gods are basically super. See, this is where words tend to be a little less useful than you might think they would be. I was about to say gods are supernatural beings, but in the pagan scheme of things, they're not supernatural, because there is nothing supernatural, because it's all part of nature, part and parcel. What I can say about my gods in my experience, what they are is they're not omnipotent, they're not omniscient, they're not omnipresent. They are fallible. They have personalities, they have preferences, they have interests, they have emotions, and they react very much like people, but they move in mysterious ways, to coin a phrase, and that means that it's not always easy to figure them out, but it's fun. At least I think it is, but then I'm twisted. Deities in our particular tradition, the E4th Wen tradition, were often described as being our most ancient ancestors. And you know, there are a lot of theories out there, and with this being an orthopraxy, you can agree or disagree with the theories, but they're interesting to explore at the very least. And some people have theories about, you know, the deity as extraterrestrial, which is actually supported by a lot of the ancient stories. In ancient Egypt, for example, the gods were said to come from Sirius, the dog star, which is on the belt of Orion, not to be confused with the Men in Black movie, where the galaxy is on Orion's belt. This is just a star, Sirius. It's also known as the dog star, and in ancient Egypt it was known as Sept or Sothis, depending on how far back you go. And they believed that all the gods came from there. Now, interestingly enough, they didn't see Sirius as being just one star. They believed that it was a trinary star system, which it in fact is. The human-headed gods were said to come from Sirius A, or what we now call Sirius A, which is the bright star, the one you actually see with the naked eye. And the bird-headed gods were said to come from Sirius B, which is the dwarf star that is in close orbit with Sirius A. But the really interesting part is when you come to the lion-headed gods, because they were said to come from Sirius C. And Sirius C is a dark star, or a black hole, which is only visible from the Earth with a radio telescope. And yet somehow, 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, the priests of the temples knew about its existence and said that some of their gods came from there. So maybe they had inside information, who knows. So that, yeah, there is a lot of stuff, if you want to believe in gods as extraterrestrials, the whole Chariot of the Gods, Eric von Däniken stuff, then there's stuff there that you can play with. What it all boils down to is anybody's guess, but for me personally, the gods are powerful spirits that I can call on and interact with, and who have a vested interest in me. In our tradition, and in quite a few traditions of traditional witchcraft, which is a very clumsy phrase, but it's what we've got, so we'll use it. In many traditions, there's this concept that there are bright gods and dark gods. And the bright gods are the gods that we create. Now that isn't as egotistical as it sounds. The idea is that we create the form and then the gods inhabit them. So for example, Chlu, who is my patron, is a bright god. He's a god of light. By definition, he's a bright god. We created the image of Hlulogifes, or Hlaichlaugifes, if you want to try and pronounce it, something approaching real Welsh. And then the entity that we come to know as Lu inhabits that image, and so they become dependent upon us. Their form goes away if we stop believing in them. It's a bit like Peter Pan and the fairies, a little bit, but not quite. They don't cease to exist, but the form with which they interact with us does. And so they have a vested interest in keeping us interested, and so they tend to be in favour of promoting our welfare, within the limitations of their remit, if you will. Gods tend to go for justice rather than what you want, and they tend to go for what's right rather than what you want. There's a theme there, you might see. But then there are the elder gods, and the elder gods are the gods that kind of predate civilization, and they tend to be non-human in form. They tend to be the animal gods or the animal-headed gods, or sometimes scary creature gods. If he hadn't been an invention of Edgar Allan Poe, not Edgar Allan Poe, the other guy, Lovecraft. Cthulhu would be considered an elder god, and in fact in the stories he is called the elder god. Elder gods are not reliant upon humanity for their existence. They are the titanic chthonic forces that existed before we came along, and as such we're probably a minor inconvenience to them, if anything. And it is part of witchcraft to work with them, but it takes special skills, and it's not for the weak-hearted or for the novice. The elder gods, to work with them, you first of all have to get their attention, and then you have to maintain their attention and gain their interest. And that's not usually the easiest or the most fun thing to do, but there are benefits to working with them, and so most experienced crafters will work at some times with the elder gods, but they save them for the really important stuff. Now what about this one god versus many gods malarkey? Well, monotheism has never sat very well with me. Mainly because it precludes the existence of any other gods. If your god is the one true and only, then all other gods are false gods, which puts you in a really awkward position when interacting with the followers of other cults or other religions or other spiritual paths. There's also not a lot of evidence to support the idea of a monotheistic deity, an all-powerful dude sitting on a cloud type scenario, because even in the Bible it doesn't really promote the one and only God. I mean, why is the first commandment in the Bible, thou shalt have no other God before me, if there aren't any other gods? Then there's the whole semantics of the word Elohim, which is a masculine word for God with the feminine plural ending, which means gods. Basically it means gods and goddesses. And then there's the fact that when you actually look at the Old Testament, it talks about two different deities who have very different personalities and have their own names, Jehovah or Yahweh and Adonai, which means Lord. And it's either two deities, one who's a god of war and the other's a god of love, or it's one very schizophrenic deity, and I know which I would prefer, to be perfectly frank. The interesting thing is that the late great JC was a prophet, or son of, depending on your perspective, of Adonai, the god of love. Whereas the god that led the Israelites out of Egypt was Jehovah, a god of war, the desert war god. And there's, I'm not going to go into all this Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian stuff, but there's the whole Enki Enlil story. Go look it up, it's fascinating, and it'll turn you into a tinfoil wearing conspiracy theorist before you know it. But it's all fun. Everyone needs a hobby. So are they archetypes or are they living beings? Well, yes. You can interact with them on both levels. So what they are probably defies all human understanding, but you can interact with them as people, and you can interact with them as archetypes. You can call a god down into full possession in your ritual. You can also cool down the energy of that god minus the personality to do a working, and sometimes that can be more useful because you don't want to have a discussion about what we're doing. and where do ancestors and heroes finish and gods begin? I mean, when you look at the stories of the Mabinogion, the stories of the gods and heroes of Wales, my own personal family set, they don't come with labels saying so-and-so is a god, so-and-so is a hero. Everyone generally accepts that Arthur and his knights are not gods, although they do some pretty godly sort of things in the stories. Whereas most people accept that Rhiannon and Ceridwen and Arianrhod are deities, despite the fact they have very human-sounding stories. It's not a hard and fast thing. What we think of as gods and goddesses and heroes is open to debate. I mean, for example, let's go back to ancient Egypt again. The entities that we refer to as gods in ancient Egypt, the word that's being translated as god is Netta. But Netta doesn't actually mean god, it means power. They are the powers. And in ancient Egypt there are approximately 2,000 major deities of national importance. They liked gods. However, in each temple, each god is referred to as the one god, and that all other gods are an aspect of them. So they were simultaneously monotheistic and polytheistic. It's another one of those wonderful, glorious paradoxes that we always love. And it really gets interesting at that point, because they're presented as historical. Osiris is referred to as king of the underworld, but also the first pharaoh in the manifest realm. All of the actual pharaohs were said to be incarnations of Horus, who is the son of Osiris. So there really isn't any clearly defined thing we can point to and say this is a god. In ceremonial magic they talk about the great work being to raise and right yourself and to evolve spiritually until you get to the point where you are as one with the gods. And that is interpreted in different ways. It's interpreted as being in the presence of God. It's becoming a god or becoming like a god. There's lots of different variations there. And how will we know what it is when we get there? Well, maybe when we get to that point we actually will understand what it is to be a god. But for now, the nature of gods they are higher beings that we call upon, who may or may not be our most ancient ancestors, who may or may not be the next step in our spiritual evolution. I like to think that those things are true, but that's just my opinion. What I do know is that when I call, my gods come. When I work with them, I get results and profound spiritual experiences to boot. So I'm not giving them up anytime soon. So let's look at some practical stuff. Let's look at work. Now, the simplest way to work with a god is to call on them. That doesn't mean ringing their doorbell. Well, perhaps metaphorically it does. There are different ways of calling on a god. The classic way of calling on a deity is known as invocation. Invoke from the Latin to call in. And you can also evoke. Evoke in ceremonial. Try that again. In ceremonial magic, evocation is calling forth a spirit that you would not call into you, and invoking is calling that spirit into your own body. And this can be done at various levels. And I'm going to save that for another podcast, because it's a big subject all by itself. But traditionally, magicians, magical workers, shamans, witches, call their deities in, either into the ritual space or into their bodies in the form of possession or aspecting or channeling, if you want to use a modern term, and then interact with them and make use of their energies and their power and potency to do whatever work it is that needs to be done. Like many things in crafting, there isn't a black and white, hard and fast delineation. It's a sliding scale. At one end of the scale you've got prayer, where you basically write a letter to the god and then read the letter out to them. You can do it on the fly, you don't actually have to write it down. But a lot of mainstream religions make use of prayer. Modern pagans often talk about spellcrafting being prayer with props, which is a phrase I hate. If you've been listening to me for any length of time, you've probably heard how much I hate the phrase prayer with props, because there is a difference between spellcrafting and prayer. Prayer is usually a supplication. It's a please, please, please make this happen. I'll be good, I promise. Whereas spellcrafting is bringing about a change in the universe. It is a crafting, a working. It's not pleading. Pleading is for when everything else has failed, in my book. You pray to your gods, you supplicate them when all else has failed and you want a miracle. Prior to that, you're working to create the miracle yourself through spellcrafting. That's my personal stance on it anyway. And there's a lot of different ways of calling on deity. A lot of different techniques of invocation. I've taught classes on invocation before at Pantheacon. I cemented my reputation for being completely crazy by demonstrating 4 techniques of full possession in an hour and a half, and live to tell the tale. If you want to find out more, I've actually got that workshop, that invocation workshop, on pay-per-view on khex.com, k-hex.com. So go and take a look. It's cheap. It's only like, I can't remember, I think it's about $5 to watch it. And I think it's one of my favourites, actually. The other end of the scale is the full possession, where the deity comes in, takes over, and works through you, uses you as a vessel. Now, this is a very potent way of working. It's not always the best way to work with deities. For example, if you're working solo, a possession is practically useless, because what happens is you call them in and they stand there in a room that is otherwise empty going, hello? Hello? Because you're not there anymore. Under those circumstances, something further down the scale than full possession is probably a good idea. And with that, you can look at contacts, where it's basically you're partway to a possession so that you are connected to them and can converse with them. This is more useful in a solo situation. When you're working by yourself, being able to have a conversation with the god is a lot more practical, and so that's where you go. Working with the ancestors is quite similar to working with gods. The main difference being that, as I said before, you call on the gods, they're going to do what's right. That means if you've got a court case you want to win, if you call on a god to help you win it, then you better be right. You better be the one who's the innocent party, because they will bring you justice. However, if you want to win when you know you shouldn't, then call on the ancestors. They have a vested interest in your success, and so they will help you win a court case, get out of trouble when really you should be found guilty. They'll make sure you get found innocent, or at least not guilty. There will always be a coin to pay. I think those of you who've been listening to my podcast for long enough will recognize the mantra that there's always a coin to pay. But calling on the ancestors can be very useful to bend the rules. You can't break the rules, but you can bend them. And the ancestors will happily help you do that. And when it comes to crafting, you know, a lot of people in the modern pagan movement call on the gods for everything. Oh, I've got a hangnail. Oh, Lady Isis, bless my pinky that it mends quickly. Isis is probably going, what the? I am not the goddess of pinky pain. However, I might be the goddess of giving you a pain in the somewhere. It's a really minor thing. It's a bit like going to the emergency room for a hangnail. If they weren't so busy and pissed at you for wasting their time, they'd laugh their asses off at you. And I have a sneaky suspicion that the gods would treat you the same way if you're calling them for every little thing. The ancestors, however, love working with us. And in our tradition, at least, in Fourth Wen, we primarily work with the ancestors, and we save the gods for the big stuff. So, you know, you want to do a healing, call the ancestors. You got somebody who's terminally ill, then you call a god. Or gods. And so it really all boils down to practicalities. The ancestors have a vested interest in you because you are of their blood. They live on through you. And so they will help you any way they can, as long as you don't piss them off by dishonouring the family name or the family tradition or whatever. The gods, on the other hand, they are enigmatic and aloof for the most part, and they will lead you on quests to get the results you need. They will make you work for it, and they will make you work for what is right, not for what you want. So if you're being a little selfish, call on the ancestors. If you want truth, justice in the American way, or the Irish way, or the Scottish way, or the Serbo-Croatian way, or whatever, if you want to sort of be high and mighty and righteous, then call on the gods. If you just want to be right, call on the ancestors. So that's it for this week. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I will look forward to joining you again next week. Take care now.
By a bent line, by a straight line, by a crooked line. The Crooked Path, a podcast for modern cunning folk with Peter Pagan.